Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, March 18th, 2025. I'm John Podhortz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, commentary contributing editor and all-around poobah at the Foundation for Defensive Democracy's host of its morning meeting and taking time this morning before he sends out his morning meeting to the world on YouTube and also to join us to explain what's been going on in the last 12 hours, our friend Jonathan Schanzer. Hi, John.
Hey, John.
So explain to us what's been going on for the last 12 hours.
We have now actually a joint U.S. and Israeli attack on the Iranian axis. I think that's probably the easiest way to sum it up. You've got the Israelis striking Hamas. It's long overdue. I think the Israelis have actually shown remarkable restraint before going back and hitting Hamas because the phase one of the ceasefire ended several weeks ago. We were in what the Israelis were calling, and it's so Israeli to say this, we were in phase 1.5, where they were trying to kind of split the difference. And see
it's phase 1.5.
Maybe 1.2, I don't know.
1.2,
Yeah.
Phase, so, it's not really a phase, it's part of a phase.
That's very good.
Thank you.
We were, sort of watching this sort of in-between kind of scenario. The Israelis, I think, were showing a lot of restraint. And, of course, over the weekend, Donald Trump orders the attacks on the Houthis to finally free the Red Sea of the terror that the Houthis had been imposing upon anyone trying to ship things into Europe or traverse the Suez Canal. I think Bibi got a sense that, hey, well, if Donald Trump has, started taking it to the Iranian axis, maybe the Israelis should do so as well. But if you think about it right now, with the Houthis, at least theoretically, getting weaker, there will be no proxy right now that poses a significant threat to Israel or the West. Out of those 7 fronts that were open in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, none of them look particularly strong right now. The one front that I think we probably, we should watch and we should probably talk about at some point is Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. That's the one area that I think still poses something of a threat to Israel just because of proximity. But in terms of the overall strength of the proxies, weak and getting weaker. And, I think Israel at this point feels a bit more unencumbered in Gaza because the vast majority of the hostages, and especially those not men of fighting age, not men who are enlisted, they've all been released. So there's less pressure on the Israelis and they can operate, I think, more freely right now in Gaza, and that's what we're seeing.
According to Israel, they believe that there are 59 hostages living and dead still in Gaza, but 21 of them are alive. The majority are dead, and the effort is being made to return their bodies for proper burial. 21 is a whole lot smaller than 251, which is what the number was on the day after October 7th. Clearly, when the ceasefire, the 6-week ceasefire ended, I think on March 1st or something like that, when that ended, that 30 hostages more had been released during that period, with 275,000 Palestinian soldiers, okay, it's like 500 Palestinian soldiers, whatever, being released by Israel as part of that deal. Ceasefire ends. The demand is made for the hostages to be released, and Hamas says no. Hamas says no. Hamas says no. Steve Witkoff goes and negotiates, and as we know, some of us here got very angry at the tone and tenor of the way that he was negotiating, and this guy, Adam Borer, who has now been, I guess, is now out of the picture, saying, "Oh, it's time to see reason. You guys, there's a lot of we have a lot of hope. The Qataris are just wonderful, and they're going to help us." But they made 2 different specific proposals that Hamas rejected. And remember, basically, there is no negotiation here. Israel stops the war. I mean, Israel stops what Israel wanted to continue the ceasefire was for the hostages to be released. So we're basically talking about kidnapper negotiating and saying no, and a kidnapper saying no, and a kidnapper saying no, and the Trump administration gave it a shot, gave it basically 2 weeks, and then over the weekend, Steve Witkoff is like, you know what looks good? Bombing people. You know what? Hamas should look and see what we're doing to the Houthis in Yemen and get really scared, because that seems to be the only way to deal with these people. And there has been an interesting congruence in the language being used by the White House and by Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar and the Foreign Minister Katz. Hold on, Defense Minister Sa'ar and Foreign Minister Katz and Caroline Leavitt. Did I get it wrong?
Other way.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, but I got you.
Katz and Sa'ar.
Right.
Witkoff, Caroline Leavitt, the White House spokesman, and Trump, and what they're all saying is hell.
Yeah.
We are unleashing hell. You will know you are at the gates of hell. You will know hell as you have never known it before. So we not only have clearly coordination between the White House and Israel, but we have what you might call apocalyptic coordination between the White House and Israel, in that the language that is being used is you let those people go, or it is
right.
The last night of Passover for you people.
Yeah, and I think that is the message, and I think that look, I don't know how tightly coordinated this is between Trump and Bibi, but we do know that they have had lots of conversations. Ron Dermer, Bibi's Minister of Strategic Affairs, has been kind of a regular here in the U.S., spending time in Mar-a-Lago and engaging regularly with Trump's team. I think that Trump has, reached a moment where he understands that all of this that the Iranians have coordinated needs to stop. I think probably the most important thing that has gone mostly unnoticed in our media is the direct threat that Donald Trump issued to Iran itself, saying that if any attack occurs at the hands of the Houthis, then Iran will be held responsible. I think right now we could be watching an endgame of sorts, where Trump is finally ridding the region of the Iranian axis, hitting the Houthis, which really they were the strongest, most active proxy over the last, let's say, 2 months or so. Hezbollah's kind of flatlined. The Assad regime collapsed, obviously. What's actually really interesting is the Iraqi front, where Shiite militias are active there. It's been very quiet. But basically, I think, Trump has made the decision that it's time to clean house and to restore some order. And Netanyahu's, realizing this is the moment to do it as well. Maybe he was done.
By the way,
what's that?
It's important to note that some reservists have been called up. That would mean a ground invasion. The ground invasion did not begin. People thought that perhaps this phase of the war would begin on the ground and not from the air, in part because of things said by the new chief of staff of the Israeli of the IDF, Zamir. This could be yet another pause. In other words, the bombing is really the last chance. They're going in, they're bombing, and then they're going to say today, let the hostages out, we will stop the bombing.
Yeah.
According to Hamas, 4 leading figures in Hamas were killed last night in the airstrikes. Let me just hold on, I have their names here, so that I'll mention them so that they can go straight to hell in case the devil is listening. Issam al-Dalis, the head of the Government Administrative Committee; Ahmad al-Khatta, Director General of Hamas's Justice Ministry. I didn't know if you knew there was a Justice Ministry. I think that means that's the body that cuts people's legs off if they talk to the Israelis. Mahmoud Abu Wafda, Director General of Hamas's Interior Ministry; and Bahad Abu Sultan, head of Hamas's Domestic security agency. So those are four major leaders of whatever.
But not major at all. I mean,
those are all Senate confirmed positions, by the way. So they'll be open for who knows how long now.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
But honestly, I think we need to understand something here. What they're calling major at this point, these were inconsequential people before the war. I think they're probably still inconsequential people now. Look, what they're hitting right now, this is not serious stuff. I mean, what they're doing is they're taking out whatever the remaining infrastructure is, and they can do so from the air, at least for now, during this phase. You may see, troops reintroduced into Gaza. That will not be popular in Israel. The idea is, why sacrifice one more soldier when you can do a lot of destruction from the air? I think what's actually most important right now, guys, is that Israel can start hitting the tunnels more freely. That they were holding off because they were afraid of hitting civilians that were being held, the hostages that were being held in these tunnels. My understanding right now is that the Israelis feel less encumbered, significantly less encumbered after phase one of the hostage release, right? And John, you mentioned that there's 21. I've heard it actually could be less. It could be 19. It could be 18. And again, all men of enlisted age. That doesn't mean that everybody's going to be happy about striking these tunnels or hitting this infrastructure, but they're far less inhibited right now. And that I think that this is setting the tone. And Hamas is now understanding that Israel feeling less encumbered to hit the underground infrastructure means that they're far more vulnerable and that they may not get out of this in one piece, whereas before, that was kind of their trump card, right? They could play that knowing that the Israelis were going to be much more careful. So right now you're looking at it in Israel that's uninhibited, a Trump administration that appears unleashed, Iran being threatened. Again, I am beginning to see something of an endgame that after a year and a half of the Biden administration allowing this stuff to continue, restraining Israel, not going in and striking the Houthis, not holding Iran to account, all of this now seems to be coming together in a cohesive way. And God forbid, I'm going to say that this looks like a strategy in trying to end the war. That's sort of what this looks like right now. Maybe even more than sort of.
I want to just share with you what it is that Bibi is up against inside Israel and whether or not some of this is going to boomerang where in a way that it has not. The moral, emotional force in Israel that has held Israel back internally, the hostage families. And the rhetoric that was being deployed last night by the most public of the hostage family spokesmen is so incendiary and so much directed not at Hamas for holding the hostages, but at Netanyahu in a deeply personal way, that I think there's something invalidating about it that is relatively new. So Yehuda Cohen, whose son Nimrod is still being held, said last night, as we feared, Netanyahu, in order to preserve his coalition and strengthen his rule, launched an attack on Hamas in Gaza, not to bring back the hostages, but to bring Ben Gvir back into the government. That's Itamar Ben Gvir, the far-right minister whose party left the government when the ceasefire, the first phase of the ceasefire was put into place. He prefers to sacrifice the remaining hostages for the sake of his corrupt rule, added Cohen. Okay? He will waste millions of shekels to protect his son in Miami, but won't lift a finger or take any risk to save my son Nimrod, who has been in the tunnels of Gaza for 17 months. All right, so I only bring this up to say that, of course, one's heart breaks for Yehuda Cohen and the torments, the unspeakable torments of the last 516 days for him. But for him to say that Bibi Netanyahu is acting solely out of an interest in preserving his own regime and his son gets to live in Miami while my son is in the tunnels, this is a moral inversion that people have, I think, vast numbers of Israelis have allowed the hostage families to speak without criticism, because everybody feels like that it is as though that were my child could be there. But I don't think that you can look at the last 3 weeks or the last 7 weeks or the fact that basically the war was suspended in January, and say that Bibi Netanyahu was only doing things to preserve himself in power and doesn't care about the hostages. If he didn't care about the hostages, he would have finished the war in January, when Trump gave him the go-ahead to finish the war in January.
Yeah, look, I fully agree. I will say that the hostages in general, the hostage families, have outsized influence because of their suffering, because of the trauma of the country. They are the symbols of this trauma. There's no question about it, and they have a platform and they use it. But I think I think there's some nuance here that we can unpack, even in Israel, if you can believe it. There was no doubt in my mind that Bibi was going back to war. There was never an intention to go to phase 2. And I can tell you, when I spoke to some senior Israeli officials back in January, my last visit there, that was exactly what the authors of this deal, that's what they had in mind. There was never going to be a phase 2. The idea was they were always going to go back in. They had to finish the job, primarily because they knew that, number one, if they got to phase 2, they would have to acknowledge that the war was going to end and that Hamas was going to stay in power. And that was antithetical to the war aims of the Israeli government, and I think the vast majority of the Israeli people.
We should explain that phase 2 called for a full Israeli pullout.
Correct.
From the negotiation, they said, was release the hostages by the end of phase 1. We come up with a strategy in phase 2 to get all the other hostages out, in exchange for which Israel will pull out of Gaza.
Entirely, right? And that was unacceptable to Bibi. It was
particularly unacceptable to Bibi because Hamas wasn't playing to release the hostages. So,
but then there are two war aims, and these were aims that were declared by Benny Gantz and Yoav Gallant and other people. The entire Israeli sort of, let's call it the center of the spectrum, right? They all were saying that there were two war aims. One is to get back all the hostages, and two, to defeat Hamas. And I believe that those two war aims were maybe at odds with one another from the very beginning. But okay, that's what they ended up laying out for the Israeli people. And there was no way that anyone was going to see the defeat of Hamas if the Israelis withdrew. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that, yes, if Bibi decided to end the war before destroying Hamas, his coalition would fall apart. And of course he doesn't want that. But I don't think that everything hinges on that right now. I think the Israelis have made a calculated decision that Hamas is not going to release additional hostages without Israel having to make sacrifices that it cannot bear. And this is the natural consequence. And the fact that we've got a green light from Trump after Bibi did exactly what Trump asked him to do, which is to hold off and allow for Witkoff to try to do the work that was necessary to bring about a soft landing to this war. It's not happening. I do think, John, you suggest one thing that is probably true. The Israelis will give Hamas a taste of what is to come, which is going to be brutal bombardment and possibly a ground invasion. And that may change Hamas's mind. And with a little bit of additional pressure on the Qataris and maybe the Egyptians and the Iranians, maybe everybody agrees that it's time to drink from the poison chalice, as they say in Iran, and finally end this thing, and not in a way that makes the Iranians or their proxies satisfied. That's, I think, the hope. I'm not holding my breath for that outcome. I think, if you ask me, this could be a somewhat grim end to the war, where the Israelis slowly but surely grind down Hamas while the U.S. grinds down the Houthis. That also will not be fun to watch. Yemen is not a lovely place under the best of circumstances. But these are the fronts that need to be fought. And then comes the big question. What does the U.S. and Israel do about the Iranian regime, which is still on the precipice of getting a nuclear weapon? What do they do right now while the skies are still naked? There's no defense right now that the Iranians can put up if the U.S. and Israel decide to go in and finally destroy that existential threat. So again, I see an endgame potentially coming here. I'm glad to see it. I don't love what it means for the hostages, the remaining hostages, those 19, 20, 21 hostages that are still alive. It's not lovely to see, but you've got to understand that Bibi has strategic decisions to make on behalf of a nation of 10 million people, not the 60 or so hostage families that have this platform in Israel.
This war has taken 16, 17 months because of the hostages.
Correct. It only because of the hostages.
And it this forever stalemate is not sustainable, and he'll have to take the hits from the hostage families. He's taken hits anyway, and the countless Israeli lives that will be saved by not releasing further prisoners, in theory, and in ending the war conclusively, with Israel having destroyed one of its enemies, root to branch, will have consequences, untold positive consequences for Israelis not even yet born, in the fact that they will not face death from Hamas or a reconstituted Hamas.
That is true. I think if things go in the right direction, and I think there's every indication right now that that's where we're heading. I think it's a smart, calculated risk by Bibi, working with Trump. He's allowed the stars to align, and he's got the top cover to be able to do this. He's got the weapons to be able to do it. I think that's positive. I'll just say this before I jump. I think that we need to be obviously careful for the surprises that can occur in war, right? Unintended consequences are forever the problem. You go in with one plan, right? The plan looks great until you make contact with the enemy. I think Israel needs to be very careful right now. The Iranian Axis has had 6 weeks to prepare for a surprise, or more than one surprise. Again, right now it looks like Israel is in control along with the U.S., but I'm watching right now for over the next couple of days to see whether the Iranians pull out some kind of a surprise. I think the Israelis will be ready for it, but it's still fluid.
Okay, so thank you so much, Jonathan Schanzer. When you jump,
I will let it load.
Leave your window open, and then when it says fully uploaded,
will do.
So thanks again.
Okay, guys, take care.
So the other interesting detail to talk about how America is responding to this renewed aggression, let's say, is the announcement yesterday that the Justice Department was opening a special task force on October 7th, seeking the use of international law to find those responsible for October 7th who are still alive and abroad in the world, and using the powers of the Justice Department and our security forces or whatever to find them, to arrest them, to detain them, which is an interesting kind of play on Israel's actions after the Munich massacre, when basically it hunted down and killed every single person who had held Israelis hostage in Munich on September 5th. This again shows a kind of level of engagement. This is important, by the way, because of course Americans were held hostage by Hamas. This is not, America doing Israel's bidding. This is America saying, okay, there's still one American hostage in there. There were 8, I think, during the course of the war. You don't get to do that and get off scot-free. We're going to pursue you the way the Israelis are going to pursue you too. So I think that's an interesting development to have happened on the same day that Israel decided to basically...
And not something that would likely have occurred under a Kamala Harris administration. I mean, the cultural amnesia of, particularly on the left, about the fact that Americans were being held hostage this entire time, that Americans were killed on October 7th, has astonished me, having been a kid in the 70s when Iran took American hostages. Just the fact that was not a steady part of the narrative anytime we saw people donning their keffiyehs on college campuses or in city streets. That choice strikes me as being both strategic and necessary, and not something a Democratic Party in its current state could ever have mustered.
Well, I think the reason that we didn't have a national movement to identify America with the hostages and to sort of go back to the yellow ribbons around the old oak tree, which was the very peculiar national sort of mood in 1980 about how we would all express support for the hostages based on a song about a guy who had just gotten out of prison. So there was always a kind of weirdly distasteful fact that we were analogizing these people kidnapped by the Iranians to somebody who had just done his time in prison and was worried that his girlfriend would have moved on without him.
Okay, but as a 7-year-old, I had no understanding that that's what the song was about. It was just a catchy tune, and every time I heard it or saw a yellow ribbon, I knew exactly what that meant, even as a child.
That's my point. Yeah. And the reason that didn't happen is that the Democratic Party did not want it to happen. Biden didn't want it, didn't want the pressure that it would present and promote, and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, fresh from having, didn't make a big deal out of it. Of course, Schumer, we just heard, has a book coming out called Anti-Semitism in America, A Warning. Canceled his book tour, which was set to start yesterday, claiming security concerns, meaning, oh no, someone's going to come and, it's too dangerous for him to go around talking about anti-Semitism in America. He's a liar. He's a coward. Go ahead.
Oh, but I thought it was because he was fearing the people who were mad at him for going along with the Republican budget pill.
The phrase is security concerns.
Right.
You know what's good for book sales? Controversy. Security concerns. You think it would hurt his book sales if he showed up, at the Baltimore JCC and there was people outside yelling and screaming and saying they hated him? That would be good for him. That would be good for his book. He doesn't like it because he wants to maintain his viability within a Democratic Party that is no longer feels itself to be a bulwark against anti-Semitism in any way, shape, or form. He misjudged by writing the book. The book comes out at a particularly bad time. The point I want to make that everybody should understand is that he could absolutely have done this stupid book tour, and he chose not to in order to graspingly save himself from his own, the depredations of his own left wing. So important is getting out his message of anti-Semitism to people that he was willing to cancel his book tour and let this book languish in obscurity in order to save his political hide. So
he should just be like we C and D list authors who just happily do every podcast. Podcasts are the future of book promotion. He can just do podcasts. I know he's not. You're right.
Well, come on here. Talk about this.
It's an open invitation, Chuck.
Oh yeah. Come on our podcast.
Oh, I would love to talk to him
at the gate.
And whoever wrote the book. Whoever his ghostwriter was, I would love to have that person on to discuss the content of the book.
Right, yes. The great George Will line when Jim Wright, the Speaker of the House, was caught figuring out how to get around the rule about how much money you could make on freelance as a senator in speaking fees by getting people to buy his book. So he had a book, he published a book called Reflections of a Speaker, and instead of getting speaking fee, he would go somewhere and they would buy 10,000 copies of his book or something like that. And George Will said, I have not read this book because in general, I do not read books that its author hasn't read. So that's, I don't know whether Chuck Schumer or not has read this book or not. Apparently it's very self-involved, so he may well, from what I gather from my friend who has read it, so maybe he did write it or at least dictated it, or he said to ChatGPT, write a book on anti-Semitism with as many self-referential anecdotes as you possibly can. Anyway, I just think it's a moment to say that Chuck Schumer, whose lack of bravery in confronting anti-Semitism in his own party and in America is an ongoing national scandal for somebody who also wants to claim the false mantle of being the highest-ranking Jewish official in American history. I don't know where anybody thinks that being the Senate Majority Leader is a ranked position. It means that 52 people voted you into something. There are governors across the United States, Josh Shapiro, J.B. Pritzker. Help me out. There's like 4 or 5 Jewish governors who got way more vote, who actually are chief executives and sort of outrank the Senate Majority Leader who has no official position in anything. So he's been walking around claiming to be the highest ranking Jewish official, and he is a coward and a fraud, and I can't wait to see what the book scan numbers are on anti-Semitism. A warning, and particularly have we heard him say anything in support of Israel since last night? Of course not. Will we hear him say anything in support of Israel's efforts in Gaza today? Of course not. Will he do anything but keep his head down and sort of cling on to his job by his fingernails? Of course not.
Well, he might criticize Israel for this.
Well, that's true. Yeah. That would be relatively revelatory.
He did that, last year, and that won him no credit. Also, remember when he said Bibi should step down?
Oh yeah,
that didn't win him any favor on the left.
Yeah, it was very effective too. What a moment for Chuck Schumer to come out on Biden's behalf and say Bibi should step down, give Kamala Harris cover, only to hear the belly laughs and guffaws of everybody in who knows how power works in a democracy. All right, so Seth, what interesting detail is that the Hamas Health Ministry is on the job. It's on the job right now. We are getting updates, counts since the fighting began 12 hours ago. Like clockwork, somebody noticed that every half an hour they're adding 50 bodies to the death count. It's sort of like they set an algorithm, or they preset their tweets to add 50 bodies an hour. I heard, of course, our favorite, Matt's and my favorite Hate Listen up first, the NPR morning podcast with their correspondent in Gaza saying that he was standing in the hospital and he could smell the blood. He could smell the blood from the bodies. And the gunpowder, the blood and the gunpowder mixed together. Apparently, not that anybody would be using purple language and reporting on, a war, that he could smell the blood. So that's clearly we're going to get some really balanced, dispassionate war reporting.
Yeah, well, the two major feats of the wars of the past few years are the Ukrainian subway system. The trains kept running during the war, and the Hamas Health Ministry kept up and running at full speed during the war. Those are the two indestructible, bureaucracies. But yeah, I mean, we said we knew it was going to happen, but in the interim, when there was a certain amount of quiet, there was a ceasefire agreement, then there was ceasefire 1.5, as you were saying earlier. There was a period where the guns had mostly fallen silent, and during that period, we had read report after report about how these numbers were essentially made up throughout the war, and then there were times throughout the ceasefire where Hamas basically admitted all those things too, right? Hamas said Israel dropped a certain number of a certain type of bomb that would have killed way more people than Hamas said it would, even more than Hamas said it did, which was Hamas's way of accidentally admitting that Israel was using its powerful bombs on areas that had already been evacuated of people. And then we saw footage of Hamas fighters emerging from the humanitarian zone where Israel had urged Gazans, civilians, to go to. And there was, a controversy there because there was a strike that took out a high-ranking Hamas official, and there was a fight over the fact that it was in technically a humanitarian zone, and it's not a humanitarian zone, it's a Hamas zone when it takes out a Hamas leader. But they basically came out and said, and then eventually they admitted that Hamas official was killed at the time and place where Israel said they had killed him months earlier. So nobody went back, by the way, and added an editor's note to the stories about, Israel claims without evidence that they had that the target of the strike was so-and-so. But we had watched in the past few weeks, we actually had watched Hamas just sort of give up the game. I mean, they came out from hospitals in uniforms. Turns out they have uniforms. We didn't know that. We've never seen that before, but it turns out they have uniforms for peacetime so that they can police the public. But they just kind of dropped any pretense of all of the way they had been manipulating reporters all along, and we sort of watched. It was kind of like watching the cast take a bow at the end of a show, and and watching like the AP and New York Times throw roses at them, at the stage. But the show wasn't over; it was the intermission, and then they went back. Oops, they took off their costumes and they washed off the paint off their faces, and so now we're just doing this again, and everybody looks that much more ridiculous. But I think it's important to keep pointing it out that yes, they can't possibly be counting the numbers that they say they have, and they all of these things that were true before are true again, and people should watch very carefully at how these things are phrased, because there isn't really a Hamas health ministry, a Gaza health ministry anywhere. There's a guy who calls the AP. None of these things exist, in other words.
But just to follow up on that point, they've given the game away. The language that they've been using since the over the last 12 hours is one move and this guy gets it. Like, they are basically now talking like somebody who is at a bank and has taken the bank manager and has the bank manager, with his arm around the neck with a gun at his forehead saying, "You better let me out of here or this guy is going to get it." Like, they are not making any bones about the fact that Israel has now signed the death warrant for the hostages because we're going to kill the hostages, as opposed to sort of like, oh, we need to stop this because we're suffering with our 3,000 calories of food a day that you're importing that we're also stealing. And we're starving here, even though you can see marketplaces all over the place that are open and selling goods openly once the ceasefire came into place. Go ahead.
The more desperate they are, the less the sort of the PR aspect of the war matters. It's becoming strictly a matter of the organization's survival.
Yeah, I mean, so and about the usual suspects are out. The Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach Schmack, whatever the hell that word is that we're supposed to use, said Israel must stop, and the EU aid coordinator said the ceasefire we must return to the ceasefire. There is no ceasefire. The only reason there was a ceasefire is that Israel ceased firing. The terms of the ceasefire were over, 18 days ago. And so saying we must return to the ceasefire is like saying there is no ceasefire. Israel is just not firing, and now it's firing. So of course the usual suspects are going to be out saying genocide and citing these numbers and all of that. And the Israelis basically have the United States behind them, and they're not going to care. And that is, I think, where Christine's point here about running backwards to November and where we would be in the United States, in Israel, in the Middle East, and all of that, had Kamala Harris won the presidency. I'm not even sure I know how to run the game. Since November, we have heard from Michael Herzog, the ambassador to Israel, that the Biden administration was lying to the American people consistently and throughout the year and month after October 7th about the arms that were being shipped to Israel, that in fact we were withholding arms, that we were lying about withholding arms, and that the administration was lying, and not only lying to the American people, but to Congress, to whom it was lying in its reports on what was going on with already authorized military aid that Congress had appropriated. So that's where they were before they lost. Had they won, I think we would be talking about cutoffs. It's entirely plausible that the Democratic Party, in its current condition, that the voices that want a cutoff of military assistance would be kind of loud and would be kind of on the march and would be saying, no, I'm sorry, Israel, you are really going it alone. You can't hit the Houthis. You can't hit Iran. You can't hit anybody. we need an end to the war and the suffering in Gaza now. And I'm sure there are people...
we wouldn't be hitting the Houthis.
Well, we certainly wouldn't
Which
be.
is an
No,
important
they took away the terrorist designation. Yeah.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah, good point.
We might hit him. We hit him a little bit here and there. Just enough to say we hit him.
And, by the way, there wouldn't be the whole Trump apparatus of the crackdown on the campuses. There would be the opposite right now, right? With a renewed Israeli campaign, it would all launch again. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the politics of the last 72, 96 hours, and other stuff. Oh my God! You know what? I've been sitting here talking into my microphone, which is not attached to the computer. So I'm actually on the... This is ridiculous. This is like one of these things. Look, see? It's not attached. You on YouTube. I'm like talking right into it like Walter Winchell.
Fake mic.
Sorry about that, everybody. Okay. So anyhow,
this is like the Seinfeld where Kramer has a talk show. Kramer has
when he has the Merv Griffin set.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. Right. Well, this is a reason why you should go to YouTube, because you can see our blooper reel. Maybe we'll make a blooper reel at the end of the year of ridiculous moments.
It's like half our show.
No, right. Okay. Anyway, now I've totally forgotten what it is. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, we, of course, have Mahmoud Khalil's... the controversy over Mahmoud Khalil. And his getting a hearing or not getting a hearing. Was the arrest by ICE legitimate or not legitimate because he's a green card holder? What is the administration going to argue? It's being briefed all over the place. I guess we're not going to hear much more until next week, it appears. But of course, then we have... So that's one issue relating to Trump's promises to crack down on certain types of behavior. And then we have the real controversy yesterday, which was the hearing in Judge Boasberg's courtroom over the deportation on these 3 planes of the accused members of Tren de Aragua. And I'm of 2 major minds about this, which is that people that I trust, including our friend Adam White and Andy McCarthy, very much in taking this strictly from a legal perspective, are looking at what happened and saying, the administration played way fast and loose here. Like, the arguments that it's making in this courtroom are bad. They're really, it should be the default position of the Justice Department that it obeys judicial findings and rulings, and they're claiming that they did, but there's very strong evidence that they didn't, and they're just playing for an appeals court or whatever. And so Andy McCarthy's piece in National Review sort of gave me real pause. And then I saw Scott Jennings, sort of the lone warrior in the mainstream media, on behalf of Trump and the right on CNN, saying they're doing it again. Congratulations, Democrats. You are going with an 80-20 issue. You're going on the 20 side of an 80-20 issue, which is, you really think the American people care about the niceties when what Trump has done is flown 230 suspected terrorists out of the country and into El Salvador, who were, murdering people and, taking over these housing complexes from Madison Avenue in Manhattan to suburban, Denver. Is this really where you want to be politically? So I think the legal and the political here are on an interesting populist collision course, which is that it's possible that liberals and people, have the better of the legal arguments here, and that Trump and the Republicans are going to have the way better of the political arguments, because with Mahmoud Khalil, in the end, what you have is people defending somebody who supports a terrorist group that kidnapped 8 Americans, that is still holding an American hostage, is in this country under false pretenses based on what he said on his green card form and various other things. So
This does bother me, because and this is what is the difference between perhaps conservatives and MAGA populists. The process is in place for a reason, and it's in place in part to protect everyone, not just your enemies making a legal argument. this is where the Trump administration's effort to be very Silicon Valley-like, move fast and break things is long-term disastrous, because it wouldn't have been that hard to do this correctly. A lot of these people who they are trying to deport, it's clearly legal to get them out of the country. But the reason we have a process is so that we don't do this at the whim of a powerful executive, or because somebody is holding views that we might dislike but that aren't actually held by terrorist groups, or they're not providing material support. So in that sense, it's really frustrating. It's the same, and this is a very tiny anecdote, but it's the same way that Trump bulldozed his way into the Kennedy Center yesterday, had taken over the board, and is saying all kinds of things that are just patently false about how the Kennedy Center honors works, for example, and how they're going to do this and that. He doesn't care about the facts, but his administration should, if they actually want to achieve this long-term kind of radical reform, which many of us share, and his vision of needing in institutions like the FBI and certainly at justice. But every time they make a simple mistake, it exacerbates their ability to see the revolution through, or to even see the reforms through. Because look, Kash Patel is doing interesting things, restructuring reporting at the FBI, something that's long overdue and that will make it a more seamless and efficient agency for lots of reasons. It's not political. Those are the sorts of things they should be doing, and they have to dot their I's and cross their T's, and they won't, because they don't care, and politically they win either way. But long term, all of this stuff gets rolled back. Whoever becomes president next, well, it might be Vance, but whoever leads next is going to face the legal ramifications of this sloppy behavior.
It's also, occurred to me, because the administration cuts corners and does these things sloppily. I hope to God that everyone who's ending up in that horrid Salvadoran prison is, in fact, a member of the gang.
Well, that's what Andy McCarthy and Adam White both say, is like, okay, so if you did not take him into a courtroom, how do you know that just because a guy has a certain tattoo that he's a member of Tren de Aragua? I mean, he could just have a tattoo that looks like a Tren de Aragua tattoo, and then you really do have a massive injustice. So I'm just talking about the politics versus the legalities. I do think that at times when there are conflicts in the United States over, I would say, law and order, or crime and punishment, and the questions of constitutional niceties. And I don't mean nicety. I mean, that sounds dismissive to say constitutional niceties. So niceties is not the word I should be using. But in moments of crisis, when people cut corners around the question of whether all the I's and the T's are being dotted and crossed, when there seems to be, like an emergency, it is the haste in action is supported by the public. The repentance in leisure takes decades to flow back and then have blowback causes. My favorite example of this would be that, when Rudy Giuliani came in and completely revolutionized the way that crime and punishment was handled in New York City, civil libertarians screamed and yelled, and black activists screamed and yelled, and all of that. And then there was 20 years of, incredible social peace. But over time, the idea that too many people were being stopped and frisked without, with only the cops saying, that guy looks bad to me, ended up with a wholesale reversal of the stop and frisk policy, which was the beginning of the end of the low crime period in New York City, and the return of social disorder and decay over the last decade.
But that tracks with something that I think the Trump team doesn't seem to realize or care about, and that's that we are now rapidly becoming a low trust society. In a high trust society, we will give the benefit of the doubt to those in authority when there is a crisis, whether it's crime, whether it's immigration, but we're not really a high trust society any longer. We're quite low trust, both about our institutions and about each other. So Trump is behaving as if, and says often, like, trust me, I'm figuring this out. I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. But we don't trust him. And so when these little mistakes happen over and over in lots of different areas, that erodes whatever tiny little band of trust he had earned in winning re-election. And I think it's problematic.
The question is, who doesn't trust him? Because I think that he could, come out and prove that he was the risen Christ, and 47% of Democrats would still disapprove of him. So he has the trust of the people that he has the trust of, and that's enough for him. The question is whether that trust erodes over time. Clearly, it could. I mean, they're very civil libertarian when it comes to January 6th, but they're not very civil libertarian when it comes to the rights of Trendiaragua, right? Or anyone who might be considered part of Trendiaragua. We're again at the point at which efforts at intellectual consistency or trying to make sure that...
But that's consistent. One is a group of citizens and one's a group of people who, many of whom came across the border illegally, who aren't citizens. That's consistent.
Right. But in other words, the idea being that, you're innocent until proven guilty unless you're an illegal alien, it's a complicated point that he has the trust of the people that he thinks he's ever going to have the trust of. It's like what he said in the speech before Congress. It's like, nothing I can say will make any of you people clap. And I'm now going to prove it. Hey, look, here's a 13-year-old brain cancer survivor that I'm giving a Secret Service badge to.
Okay, but this goes to
not clapping.
This goes to Abe's point, though. That's when he lets the troll overtake what he should be doing, which is actually trying to build some trust, even among his own base, by saying, "I'm doing this because it's best for you," and also we're going to do it right this time. Because half of what he rolled back into the White House arguing, which was correct, which was that the Biden administration was just a mess. Like, nothing worked. They kept saying one thing, doing another, or they kept trying these crazy schemes that, redounded badly for the economy or for the border. He came in saying, I'm going to fix it all. If you're going to fix it, you can't just slap a, peeling Band-Aid that's been floating on the surface of the hotel pool over this, sorry. Oh, God, that was a terrible metaphor. I'm so sorry.
Brilliant. What a good
no, you can't do that. You actually need to stitch up the wound and cleanse it and move on.
I think that's an excellent metaphor.
I think he's doing it, but you're right.
That was amazing. Actually.
I also think that this is like, he's not running for election again, and we've said throughout that we're going to see what he looks like when he doesn't need anybody's votes ever again. And I don't know if he cares about any of this. We don't know. He may, but he really may not. He may not care who trusts him and who doesn't trust him. I mean, I think this is the sort of, Trump unleashed that people were warning about, which is that there's nothing really tethering him to the system at all, because he doesn't need to go back to the system and ask permission to be in office again. And he's never really shown any interest in what his institutional wreckage means for the Republican Party as a party, right? So obviously I think he wants Vance, he'd prefer Vance succeed and not fail. He'd prefer Vance be elected after him instead of not be elected. But I think it stops there, right? I mean, I think it's like a preference thing, but I don't think that he is thinking long term about, what this means for the Republican Party. And so he's kind of out there doing the Harry Reid, daring the other side, Harry Reid getting rid of, we're going to get rid of the filibuster, and McConnell saying you're going to regret doing that, right? Because we have the same abilities and the same rights as you do, and we'll use that too. And so now he's sort of daring. It feels like he's sort of daring the Democrats to take any of these precedents and go forward with them when they're in power, and not really thinking about what that means for the Republican coalition, because for him, he's the coalition. And also because, as you say, while there's nothing he can do to make Democrats clap, many Democrats clap, there's really nothing he can do to earn the boos, the Bronx cheer from his own base. I think he feels that everything is pretty much set in place.
Again, I think it's very hard in moments of crisis, and people feel like there's a border crisis and an immigration crisis and a terrorism crisis, to say you really want the law to be respected and preserved and protected to the highest possible degree, because that's for you. That's to protect you in case something unjust or untoward happens toward you. You need all of those protections that
No,
are
but he could say the law has been flouted by the previous administration for 4 years. We are going to respect it, and here's what that means:
but
enforcement.
In crisis, people say, "I'm not a terrorist. I'm never going to talk about
nothing to fear, nothing to hide." Right?
Talk positively about Hamas. I'm not having a protest and blocking the paths at Barnard College, and I'm not a member of a crime gang. Making them associate the notion that that their rights need to be protected in protecting the rights of the people who find themselves in this dragnet. It's not about them. It's about protecting their rights. It's a very hard leap for people to make.
But it's not protecting the rights of the people who he's trying to deport. It's respecting the process, the legal process. Process is a very different argument to make over rights. I think you're correct about the rights stuff. But I think he could make an argument about process. And the whole point is that that's, again, in stark opposition to what the Biden administration did to the idea of process, which is throw it out the window and throw open the border.
But I think he's in a stronger position because people don't make the leap between enforcing the rules, the rule of law, and the administration of their own lives, the steady administration of their own lives.
Well, that's a serious mistake because our country's grounded in the rule of law, not in, But
it's too abstract, because what they say is, those guys, they're all criminals, and I'm not a criminal, and so, maybe I should care about their rights, but I really don't. I'm never going to be in that situation, and they're wrong. I mean, they probably aren't. But the thing is that if you run roughshod over rights, then you get caught a cop pulls you over and needs to make a quota and says you have drugs in your car and
it also
and lies, and then you have been a participant in a world that says that people are guilty until proven innocent, and then you're the one who needs the rule to be that you're innocent until proven guilty. But that's a hard leap for a lot of people to make because they're very literal minded, and I'm not in Tren de Aragua, so I don't care how Tren de Aragua is taken out of the country. I'm just glad they're taken out of the country.
And also, when an administration doesn't do things by the book, it sets a precedent for administrations of both parties. It lowers the bar. I think a lot of Trump can get away with a lot now, in part because Biden's administration ran roughshod over the law and did so many things the wrong way. That gave Trump a lot of room.
Yeah, and Obama gave Trump room in the first term.
That's right.
With the pen and the phone.
And I also think that Trump thinks he's the guy who was guilty until proven innocent. And now he's on the other side, and so that argument doesn't have purchase with him personally. He doesn't.
Rather than
hear, one day you'll be falsely accused of something and put in the courtroom.
Yeah.
The timeline for him is the opposite. He believes that he was guilty until proven innocent and set up over and over again, and now he's on the other side, and he thinks this is the Democrats' comeuppance. This was you guys, from Trump's perspective, you guys didn't think about setting the precedent of, you thought I was Tren de Aragua or whatever it is, and you tried to put me on a plane.
But he's got an interesting psychology. Because of course, the famous joke is that a liberal is a conservative who's been arrested, right? So suddenly a liberal wants all of the rights, and the conservative gets arrested, and then he needs rule of law and innocent until proven, free speech rights, and all the legal niceties followed and all of that. Trump has gone the other way. Trump, feels that he was unjustly treated, and what he wants to do in response is unjustly.
And he was. He actually was unjustly treated. So he's not wrong about that.
Say what happened to me shouldn't happen to anybody else ever again. He's like, no. The shoe is now the shoe's on the other foot, baby.
This is why temperament matters when you choose your leaders.
That's correct. Okay. So, Christine, you wanted to.
I have a kind of well, I'm going to make a recommendation because I have a lot of optimism about what I'm going to recommend. But there's only been one episode, but I like this guy's work. So this is John Mulaney's new Netflix called Everybody's Live. It's a weekly variety show. And it's weird and wonderful, like Mulaney. I mean, it's extremely quirky. It's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. His first episode aired last week. His sidekick, the kind of Ed McMahon character, is Richard Kind, who is amazing. Love Richard Kind. So they're working out the kinks. But he did this when he did a limited series for Netflix last summer called Everybody's in L.A. or Everybody Live in L.A. So it's still set in L.A. This similar set and whatnot, similar setup. But it's just such a refreshing departure from what late night TV has become, which is this celebrity industrial complex of, interviewing the starlet who's got a new movie out and the predictable band and the monologue that really sometimes lands, but often is too politicized or boring. So he's mixing it up. So I appreciate that aspect of it. He's also kind of a nerd, I think, because there's this wonderful, the best sketch of that first show was a Willy Loman focus group. So it's all these people who've played Willy Loman being focus group.
People play Willy Loman, including Christopher Lloyd.
Yes, I mean, serious actors.
A 14-year-old girl who did it at Contra Costa.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, but that's the weird. Yeah, the weird part of it. So, and then he has a musical. He had Joan Baez. Yes. So
and asking the Willy Loman focus group questions like, "Do you think that there are two genders?" and stuff like.
No, it's so weird.
Asking in the voice of Willy Loman from Death of the Salesman how he feels about various current political and social
well, and then they all end by doing the famous final speech, the famous speech all together in unison. I mean, it's so bizarre, but I found it funny. So it's a particular kind of humor. I really want to see the show succeed though, because it is quirky and unusual and new, and you don't see that a lot on late night. And and I think he is one of the best comedians working right now, just in terms of stand up and whatnot. So I'm going to recommend it. If I'm wrong, you can punish me for it because I've only seen the one episode. I watched the next. It's on Wednesday nights, 10. If you're on the East Coast, it airs live at 10 p.m. Yeah.
But you can watch it on Netflix at any time.
Right, you can go and watch. But I'm recommending Mulaney's Everybody's Live.
But it is basically an episode of Johnny Carson.
Yeah. There are hints of Carson. Yes. Yeah.
Because Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert, everybody else, they moved away from the format of really the couch, three guests on the couch, the comedy bits with the sidekick. They're not quite structured like that anymore. And this has this bizarre throwback quality. He had a financial advisor on as one of the panelists.
Yeah, the theme was sort of loaning money. Yeah,
loaning money. I also like this sketch he did where Kind says he's given him a telescope as a present on the set, and he looks through the telescope finder, and every apartment that he looks at, there's some guy sneaking up behind another guy, smashing him over the head with a lamp. It's like characters moving around. Anyway, it is only eccentric.
Craig Ferguson was the last to really do it, right? I mean, he was the last to really do a traditional late night show where it was just about being quirky and making people laugh and all that sort of thing. And he had, he would have the guests, but I think it also depends on the guest, but that was the last time there was an earnest, one thing I like about what John Mulaney does these days is he has a really good sense of humor about himself. And you didn't feel they used to say about David Letterman near the end of his show that, when the host of a party doesn't look like they're having fun anymore, probably the guests aren't either. And Ferguson was the last guy who everybody seemed to really have a lot of fun at the party until it was over.
You gotta say though, I for some reason on Facebook, I don't know why, I get served up by the algorithm these bits and pieces of the Craig Ferguson's show, which was on at 12:30 on CBS, I think until 2019 or something like that. And somebody is serving up Craig Ferguson clips. And for some reason...
The AI loves Craig, I guess, right?
I don't know. Anyway, and here's the weirdness of it, which is that all the clips are Craig Ferguson with a beautiful young starlet, star of a CW show, One Tree Hill, or something like that. She comes out, she's in a short dress or something like that, and the entire show is the entire clip of 4 minutes is Craig Ferguson ogling her and making incredibly dirty and inappropriate double entendre jokes about her in a way that it feels like could have been 1961, and the fact that it was like just 10 years ago, and how Me Too happened, and no one will ever speak this way again to a young woman on a talk show. It's kind of jaw-dropping as a
it
kind
is
of
in a way because
piece of
he got out just in time.
Yeah.
He isn't a figure from the past, as you say. He literally got out as it was like as the meteor was hitting the ocean and the wave was coming.
So Mulaney needs to have the hot young actors come sit on his couch, and he can reverse the equation.
Right. Again, so the show, you just look up John Mulaney on Netflix.
It's called Everybody's Live, and it's on Netflix.
Everybody's Live, right. Yeah. He did say that they called the last year, they called it Everybody's in LA, and then they did Netflix did focus groups and discovered
people hate LA.
People hate LA. So he had to take LA out of the name.
They're all too beautiful there. They're just too beautiful.
Exactly. Okay.
Some of them are funny.
Yes, so we'll be back tomorrow for Seth, Christine, and Abe, and thanks to John Chanzer for his insights and wisdom. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.